بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم انصر أولياءك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها، اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدو منك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم اخرج عنا من إخواننا في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها، اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطفنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا، زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم وصل عليه. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. Okay, so we are here somewhere. The neoliberal system of rule has a very different structure than early modern capitalist states, which were presumably based on repression alone, which is not true, as we saw last time. The power maintaining the system is no longer repressive. That's not true for various reasons, which we discussed last time, but it's important to go through that again. And instead, seductive, meaning tempting. So, in capitalism, with capitalist state, you have, in capitalist states, both liberal and non-liberal capitalist states, the mechanism of inclusion and exclusion go hand in hand. So you try to include as many people possible within the system. But then you exclude those who are no longer willing to be included or who are a threat to the system. So depending on how much inclusion and how much exclusion will be affected at a particular time and space depends on the many contingent factors as well, but essentially depends on the strength of or perception of the strength and relative strength and weakness of a capitalist state. In a similar way, repression and freedoms, seduction and freedom and repression go hand in hand. And to the extent that people are seduced, and repression is no longer necessary, but repression is always there. And in fact, freedom work in the context of repression. So the soul which is to be let loose or let free is a creation, at least in part, of repression and discipline and all those things. So that's why this dichotomy of seduction and reduction is very ahistorical. Even today, there's a lot of repression which is needed at different levels. That repression doesn't need to be, naked repression. It can be hidden, it can be camouflaged, etc. So repression is always there alongside seduction. The seduction is always there alongside repression. So how much seduction and repression is needed will depend on the relative strength of a system there, and it also depends on the group you belong to. For example, minority groups, which are seen as a threat to the ruling group, can be persecuted alongside, system of seduction, for example, etc., etc. But this whole dichotomy is very, very historical. So the neoliberal system of rule has a very different structure here. The power maintaining system is no longer repressive. That's not true. Yeah. Like even in the first world, in fact, neoliberal system is very repressive in many ways. So you can't say the Reagans and Thatcherite periods were not repressive, at least to a certain sectors of population. So instead, seductive meaning tempting. It is no longer as visible as in disciplinarian regimes. And disciplinarian regimes were also not necessarily blatantly repressive, at least not the successful ones. And disciplines are removed to the extent that disciplines are internalized. The internalization of discipline through education and training is very important. What else? And also, freedom itself is a technology of discipline. So this whole dichotomy between freedom and discipline is untenable. As for example, we can see in the work of postmodernists like Foucault and others. There's no opposite. There's no person. There is no person opposite, no enemy who represses liberties, and who one could possibly resist. It might not be a person. There's a whole system, and there are personnel of the system. There's a police, there is the army, there are secret services, there's the media, there's the ruling classes. Even if there's ruling classes, there's a possibility for upward mobility, etc. They're visible. There are visible enemies. The system itself is an enemy. I mean, it's true that in a capitalist system, everybody is seduced and repressed to a certain extent, even those who are the beneficiaries of the system. But to say that there's no visible enemy doesn't make sense. It's I don't know which reality he lives in. Neoliberalism moves each oppressed worker into a free entrepreneur entrepreneurs selling himself. Yeah, ask the workers in Amazon. uh, and free enterprise, free entrepreneur, press worker. Even in Germany, and you know, even in white collar jobs, you're working like a machine, and people feel oppression even in those levels. At those levels, today we are all self-exploiting workers in our own enterprises. I mean, even if it is true, and it is true to a certain extent, that's because those oppression, those disciplines are being internalized, but not everyone has internalized. And those who have internalized doesn't mean that they can't rebel or they can't reverse that internalization, or they can't feel the internal incoherence and contradictions. Each of us as a master and slave roll into one. This again can be true, master. Protestant ideal. So that's what self-discipline is. Discipline requires self-discipline, but that doesn't mean that we are all at the same level of masterhood and slavehood. And class struggle becomes an internal struggle with oneself. I mean, even if there is no class, and in a sense there is no class, but there are groups, there are haves and have-nots, there is who benefit from system more or less, and above all, there is a system as an anonymous power which oppresses everybody and exploits everybody. It doesn't have to be a struggle against a class. It can be a struggle against the system. So it's not the falsehood of, or the incoherence of Marxist struggle doesn't mean that every struggle against capitalism is incoherent. Class struggle become an internal struggle. Or anyone failing today gives themselves the blame and feels the shame. Not everyone, and it is not necessary. And people can have, even if those who blame themselves, they can be talked out of this. They could be told a different story. The problem is sought within rather than in society. Not really. Some people might, but a lot of people blame society, blame governments, blame globalists, blame right wing, blame left wing. What is he talking about? Anyway, okay, let's stop here. We'll continue from here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illallah نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين.